So, good morning or good evening, wherever you are. So, for the last couple of weeks, we've been going through the Bodhisattva vows in conjunction with Chapter 3 of Shantideva's Engaging in the Bodhisattva Deeds. And so, we're still on the root downfalls. And I thought that it would be nice to just start by doing some meditation to try to generate this attitude of bodhicitta, even if it's still very contrived, artificial. It's still a good thing to do. Gradually planting seeds in our mind that will help us eventually generate uncontrived, spontaneous bodhicitta, and then actually be a bodhisattva. And since today is the anniversary of Lama Tsongkhapa, I thought it would be auspicious to use a verse from one of his texts, The Three Principal Aspects of the Path, a verse that, is all about generating compassion and love for bodhicitta, for sentient beings and generating bodhicitta. So let's just do some contemplation on this for a little while. So this is verse 7 in the text, The Three Principal Aspects of the Path. Probably many of you know it by heart, but for those who don't, I'll read it. Swept by the current of the four powerful rivers, tied by the strong bonds of karma, which are so hard to undo, caught in the iron net of self-grasping ignorance, completely enveloped by the darkness of ignorance. So that's the first part, and then the next verse continues. But let's contemplate this part. So he's talking about sentient beings, and mentions four powerful rivers. So the four rivers are ignorance, which is seeing things in a mistaken way, seeing things as if they existed inherently, independently, objectively, from their own side. And in reality, nothing exists that way. That's a completely false mode of existence, but we're kind of hallucinating all the time, seeing that everything exists that way, including our own I and others and everything in the world. We see things as if they exist that way, and we believe in that. So we're kind of like in this state of being, hallucinating, or being in a dream and not seeing things correctly. So all the sentient beings in samsara are under that kind of spell of ignorance. That's the first powerful river. And the second is incorrect views, wrong views, which includes, some people think there's no such thing as enlightenment, no such thing as liberation from samsara, no karma, no rebirth, past lives and future lives. So these are views that keep us stuck in samsara, cyclic existence, and don't allow us to free ourselves. So many people their minds are afflicted by these wrong views. The third powerful river are the afflictive emotions related to the desire realm. This is where we are. We're in the desire realm, and many other beings as well, including the lower realms, and also some devas are in the desire realm. So there's certain afflictions that are characteristics of the desire realm, such as sensory desire, attachment, and also anger and jealousy. And so this is another thing that's happening in our mind. These desire realm afflictions coming up again and again, messing up our mind, causing our mind to be disturbed, messing up our lives because we act on them and just deepen our situation of suffering. And then the fourth powerful river are the afflictive emotions of the higher realms, the form and formless realms. So the beings in those realms have suppressed the desire realm afflictions. So those are not jumping around in their minds, but they still have more subtle kinds of afflictions, such as attachment to the bliss of meditative concentration. And sometimes they have pride, thinking how great they are, and deceit, and so on. So they're also not completely free of afflictive emotions. And we have those as well, even though they're subtle. They're really deep and subtle in our mind, but our minds are not free of them. So sentient beings are carried along by these four rivers, which are all in our mind. They're internal mental rivers. And we are carried by these four rivers through samsara, cyclic existence, one life after another, continuing to take rebirth in samsara and then have our minds afflicted by these four powerful rivers. So it's similar to somebody who falls into a river, and it's a really powerful river, and they're not able to swim against it and get themselves out. So the river just, pushes them along downstream, and probably knocks them against rocks and pulls them under the water and so on. So it's really a terrible situation. So we and all other sentient beings are in that kind of situation. So just get a sense of that. And then on top of that, the verse mentions being bound by karma. So being under the influence of ignorance and other afflictions, we do actions with our body, speech, and mind. And many of these are non-virtuous, unwise, unskillful. And the imprints of those actions are planted in our mind and go with our mind from one life to the next. So we have probably an uncountable number of karmic imprints we've accumulated in our past lives. And we are bound by our karma, because as long as we still have karma and we don't have control over our karma, then that causes us to take rebirth again and again without choice, without control, and experience various unwanted problems and sufferings as we go through life. So, in the analogy of the person who fell into the river, imagine if this person's hands and feet are tied up, so they can't even try to swim and get themselves out of the river. So again, sentient beings in samsara are really tied up tightly because of their karma and very helpless. So it's really a pitiful situation. And then the verse mentions being caught in the iron net of self-grasping egoism. So our wrong view of ourself, I, me, clinging very tightly to that. It's very hard to get free of that. So he says that's like being caught up in a net, an iron net. very hard to get out of. So the person who fell into the river, not only are their hands and feet tied up, but they're wrapped up in this iron net, making it even harder for them to free themselves from that situation. Then on top of that, sentient beings are shrouded in the darkness of ignorance. So here ignorance just means like being in a state of confusion, not able to see things clearly as they are. So it's like being in the dark. So again, this analogy of the person in the powerful river, tied up, wrapped in an iron net. On top of that, it's dark, completely dark, so they can't see where they're going, and makes it even harder for them to free themselves from this situation or know what lies ahead, what kind of other dangers lie ahead of them. So, and then the next verse says, born and reborn in cyclic existence, unceasingly tormented by the three sufferings. So the suffering, the suffering of change, pervasive compounded suffering. By thinking of all mother sentient beings in this condition, generate the supreme altruistic intention. So there's a very clear image here of sentient beings trapped in this really awful situation, being very helpless. And then on top of that, all of these beings have been our mothers in past lives. The Buddha said that. They've been our mothers, our fathers, our brothers and sisters, our friends, our partners and spouses. They've also been our children. So we've been very close to them, intimately close. Received an enormous amount of kindness from each and every one of those beings. And now they're in that terrible situation. So if we think about this deeply, it naturally gives rise to the wish to help them, the determination to help them. And that's starting to give rise to bodhicitta. Try to feel that wish. How wonderful it would be if we could help sentient beings get themselves out of this terrible situation. And the best way that we can help them is by developing our potential for enlightenment, our Buddha nature. So we have that ability in our mind. It's been there from beginningless time, but we just never knew about it, recognized it, knew how to make it manifest. But now we do. Now we have access to the teachings on how to awaken our Buddha nature, how to cultivate it, and bring our mind to the state of enlightenment, just like the Buddha did. And by doing that, we'll be able to help all these sentient beings, our kind mothers, in the best possible way. Be able to guide them out of samsara and guide them to enlightenment as well. So see if you can feel the wish, the determination to do that. And make everything you do in your life, life after life, a cause for becoming enlightened, to help all living beings. And I think that's our reason for gathering this morning and looking at the Bodhisattva vows to help train our minds on our lives in this way, following the Bodhisattva's path to reach full enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings. Okay, so last time we got up to number 10 of the 18 root downfalls. So we'll start today with number 11. And I'll read from Alex Berzin's explanation and then add some more from Dr. Rinpoche's book. So Alex uses the word voidness for emptiness. You've probably heard that before. So number 11 is teaching voidness to those whose minds are untrained, or teaching emptiness to those whose minds are untrained. So the primary objects of this downfall are persons with the bodhicitta motivation who are not yet ready to understand voidness. And Dr. Rinpoche says the person has taken Bodhisattva vows, but hasn't yet realized bodhicitta. So this is the kind of person we're talking about. They have the wish to follow the Bodhisattva's path and reach enlightenment. They've even taken the Bodhisattva vows, but they haven't yet realized bodhicitta, and they also haven't yet realized emptiness. And they're not quite ripe to hear about emptiness. So it says, such persons would become confused or frightened by this teaching on emptiness, and consequently abandon the Bodhisattva path for the path of personal liberation. So you might wonder, well, how could that happen? So he gives an example. He said it can happen as a result of thinking that if all phenomena are devoid of inherent findable existence, then no one exists. So why bother working to benefit anyone else? So that's the nihilistic view. It's not the correct view of emptiness, but some people do fall into that thinking, oh, things don't exist inherently, independently, objectively. That means there's nobody. There's no sentient beings, no I, no others. So why work so hard to help sentient beings? They're not even there. So apparently this does happen. People do fall into that misunderstanding. And then they may think, well, I'll just free myself from samsara, and that's enough. That's good enough. So they turn to the path of solitary peace, self-liberation. And Dr. Rinpoche says the downfall is complete only if the person does actually abandon the Mahayana path. So even if we do talk about voidness to somebody who's not quite ripe, and maybe they get shaken up a little bit, but they don't actually abandon the Mahayana path and go to a lower path, then we don't commit the downfall. And also, he says, because they say you're supposed to try to check somebody's readiness to understand emptiness, and try to determine, is this person really ready to hear about emptiness or not? So if you did try to check and you thought they were ready, you did really take care and you thought that they were ready, but you were wrong, then the downfall is incomplete. So it happens only if you don't even try to check and you just blurt it out, talk about emptiness to this person, and then they misunderstand it and give up Mahayana. So that's when the downfall happens. And Alex says, this action also includes teaching voidness to anyone who would misunderstand it, and therefore forsake the Dharma completely. For example, by thinking that Buddhism teaches that nothing exists and is therefore sheer nonsense. So even if someone isn't at the point of, taking Bodhisattva vows, but just initial Dharma student, beginner Dharma student, then if they give up Dharma completely, then this could, I'm not sure if this really is a downfall, but anyway, it's not a good thing to do. So we do have to be careful when it comes to talking about emptiness. And he says, without extrasensory perception, I guess that means the ability to see people's minds. It's difficult to know whether others' minds are sufficiently trained so that they will not misconstrue the teachings on the voidness of all phenomena. Therefore, it is important to lead others to these teachings through explanations of graduated levels of complexity and periodically to check their understanding. So the ideal thing is to teach people in a gradual way, like the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment. Emptiness comes at the end. You don't teach them that right away. But on the other hand, there's so many teachings available online and so many books available, and people can, on their own, learn about emptiness, and they might learn mistaken explanations of emptiness, and so it can happen. But that's not our fault. We don't commit a downfall if that happens. But anyway, there's just so many teachings out there, and often people just collect teachings without having a teacher to guide them, which is more risky, puts them in more danger. So it really is emphasized that you have a proper teacher and follow the guidance of a teacher, and that teacher will guide people gradually according to their level of ability. Okay, number 12 is turning others away from full enlightenment. So this is also with regard to people or a person who has already developed a bodhicitta motivation and has taken the bodhisattva vow. And so they are working to reach enlightenment. The downfall is to tell them that they are incapable of acting all the time with generosity, patience, and so on, to say that they cannot possibly become a Buddha, and so it would be better for them to strive merely for their own liberation. Kind of hard to imagine doing this, but I don't know why anybody would do this. But maybe you dislike somebody and you want to get rid of them. So you try to say, well, I don't think you're really suitable for this path. Well, why don't you go to the Theravada temple, the Theravada center? That's more suited for you. I don't know, but anyway, if we did something like that, pushing someone out, kicking someone out, basically, of, the Mahayana path, and causing them to turn away from that and work just for their own liberation. But again, it says, unless they actually turn their aim away from enlightenment, however, this root downfall is incomplete. So even if you try to push somebody off the Mahayana path, but it doesn't work. Maybe they just go to another Mahayana Buddhist center and they still stay on the Mahayana path. So then you don't commit this downfall. It's not a complete downfall, but it's still not a nice thing to do. So we should make sure we don't do that kind of thing. And number 13 is turning others away from their pratimoksha vows. So this would be then with regard to anyone who has taken pratimoksha vows, which includes not just monks and nuns, but also laymen and laywomen, because the 5 precepts are also included in pratimoksha vows. So anyone who is keeping, there's actually seven sets of pratimoksha vows. There's laymen, laywomen, the shikshamana, those nuns who are on the way to taking full ordination, novice monks, novice nuns, and then full monks and full nuns, so 7 altogether. So anyone who's keeping one of these sets of vows, if you tell them that as a bodhisattva there's no use in keeping these vows, because for bodhisattvas all actions are pure. Some people might have that idea. You don't need to keep those vows. If you're a bodhisattva, you're on the bodhisattva path, whatever you do is pure. So you don't need, it's possible. Some people might have that idea. And Dakpa Rinpoche says another thing you might tell them would be, you don't need to keep those vows. All you have to do is generate bodhicitta, read Mahayana scriptures. So anyway, you cause them to give up their pratimoksha vows. And if that happens, then you get the downfall. So even if you try to get them to give up their pratimoksha vows, but they don't, it's not a complete downfall, but it's still something negative. It's still a misdeed, bodhisattva. So keeping the pratimoksha vows is not at all contradictory to the bodhisattva path. In fact, it's a very important, beneficial basis, because we need to learn how to behave properly and refrain from unwise, unskillful, harmful behavior. And then on top of that, the bodhisattva vows are about even more subtle levels of mistakes that we could make or harmful behavior that we could get involved in. So if we take away the basis, then it's hard to keep the bodhisattva vows and live our life in accordance with the bodhisattva attitude. Number 14, belittling the Shravaka vehicle. Shravaka is what you usually call them? Hearers, yeah. So this is a type of practitioner, type of follower of the Buddha who strives to attain their own liberation, their own nirvana. And they're called listener because they listen to the Buddha's teachings, and sometimes they will also cause others to listen. They will teach others about these teachings. So this, previously, root downfall number 6 was to repudiate that the texts of the Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha, solitary realizer vehicles, are the authentic words of the Buddha. So we were rejecting their texts, their teachings. Here we accept that they are the words of a Buddha, but deny the effectiveness of the teachings and maintain that it is impossible to become rid of disturbing emotions and attitudes by means of their instructions. For example, those concerning vipassana or insight meditation. So in the 6th root down, the 6th downfall, if you were to say, oh, those teachings were not taught by the Buddha, they're not authentic Buddha's teachings. So you're talking more about the texts, the teachings. So here you're not doing that. You do accept and acknowledge the validity of those teachings as those of the Buddha, but you're putting down their effectiveness. You're saying, oh, if you practice those teachings, you won't be able to free your mind from the afflictive emotions, greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on. So it's a waste of time. And so you try to turn somebody away from following that vehicle, which could happen. Some people might be, I don't know if there's a word for this, but, so attached to the Mahayana vehicle and think this is the only one that's valid, this is the only one that works, everybody should follow that. It's a waste of time to follow the other paths, the other teachings that the Buddha gave. You won't be able to get rid of your afflictions that way. So it's possible somebody might have that kind of idea. And it's wrong. It is wrong. So the Mahayana vehicle does acknowledge the validity and the effectiveness of the other two, the hearer and solitary realizer vehicles. By following those, it's definitely possible to free the mind from disturbing emotions and attain nirvana. It's just not possible to go all the way to Buddhahood by relying solely on those vehicles. But you can definitely get out of samsara and attain nirvana. So we should respect those vehicles and respect practitioners who are following those vehicles. Okay, then number 15, proclaiming a false realization of voidness or emptiness. So Alex says, we commit this downfall if we have not fully realized voidness, yet teach or write about it, pretending that we have, because of jealousy of the great masters. Although Dakpa Rinpoche in his commentary said it's lying. The transgression here is actually lying. And he says there is no jealousy involved. Otherwise it would be number one. It would be root downfall number one. Praising yourself out of attachment or jealousy. Anyway, so you're pretending in some way that you have realized emptiness, even though you have not. And it says, it makes no difference whether any students or readers are fooled by our pretense. So even if nobody believes us, it's very obvious our behavior that we haven't realized emptiness. But still, doing it is still a downfall. But they do have to understand what we explain. So if you try to talk to Upekkha or Mudita and you say, hey, I've realized emptiness, that wouldn't be a downfall because they wouldn't be able to understand what you're saying. So if they don't understand, then the downfall is incomplete. And Dakpa Rinpoche says it's also a pratimoksha defeat. So one of our, if we have the Bhikshuni vows, one of the defeats is lying about realizations. But also for Shramaneras and Shikshamanas, they have also this, the four, it's not called a defeat, but it's similar to a defeat, that it's also about lying about realizations. So that's considered a very serious offense. If we directly lie or pretend in some way that we have a realization that we don't, because it misleads people. People can be misled by that and maybe even go down a wrong path, or anyway, something disastrous could happen. So although this vow refers to proclaiming false realizations specifically of voidness, it's clear that we need to avoid the same also when teaching bodhicitta or other points of dharma. So Dakpa Rinpoche says it's also a downfall to claim other realizations like bodhicitta or calm abiding or renunciation. So any kind of realization that we claim that we have, which we actually don't have. So it extends to more than just emptiness. And then Alex says there's no fault in teaching voidness before fully realizing it, as long as we openly acknowledge this fact. We make it clear, I haven't realized this, but anyway, I've heard lots of teachings, so I'll share what I've heard. And that we are explaining merely from our present levels of provisional understanding. So I've met a couple of people who have claimed to have realized emptiness, although it could be that they just made a boo-boo, that they had some kind of experience and thought it was a realization of emptiness, but it wasn't. So they say it's always good to check with a teacher, check with someone who's more knowledgeable, more experienced than we are, and make sure that we did actually have a realization of emptiness before we start making such claims. But also, it's not really proper in Buddhism. Even if you do have a realization of emptiness or other realizations, we're not supposed to go around and talk about them. We're supposed to keep them hidden and discreet. Okay, number 16, accepting what has been stolen from the triple gem. This downfall is to accept as a gift, offering, salary, reward, fine, or bribe, anything someone else has stolen or embezzled, either personally or through deputing someone else from the Buddhas, the Dharma, or the Sangha, including if it belonged only to 1, 2, or 3 monks or nuns. So, rude downfall number 5 was stealing from the 3 jewels. So that's we ourselves taking something that belongs to either the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. So this one here isn't we ourselves stealing, but it could happen in another way, like if somebody else has stolen and then they offer that to us and then we accept it, knowing, I think we have to know that it was stolen. If we didn't know, then probably wouldn't be complete. But I'll read, Dakpa Rinpoche gives an example of this, how this could happen. A little complicated. So he says, the scriptures usually illustrate this transgression by kings and their ministers. For example, a minister who is backed up by his president or whatever, king, prime minister. So a minister wants something that belongs to one of the 3 jewels. For example, gems that have been placed on the altar of a temple as an offering to the Buddha. So maybe the minister goes into this temple and sees all these precious jewels on the altar and gets greedy and thinks, oh, I want those. He imposes a huge fine on the abbot of the temple and threatens him with dire consequences if he fails to pay. Frightened to death, the abbot has one of his monks steal the gems for him and then gives them to the minister, who has thus succeeded in his mission. He then returns to his office and shares the stolen goods with his president. In the event that the president knows where the gems came from, and both he and the minister consider that they now belong to them, they both commit this transgression. So I don't know how likely that would be to happen. It's possible. If we have precious gems on the altar in Sravasti Abbey, and maybe a local person comes, somebody who's got some power, a local commissioner or mayor or whatever, maybe the governor, hopefully not. But anyway, if they come and visit and they see these jewels and they think, oh, I really want those, then they devise this scheme to get them, putting a fine on the abbey.
I know about the abbot who took him from the 3 jewels, the downfall that he has. I mean, is there some complexity there as far as what
he probably committed number 5.
Okay.
Number 5 is stealing from the 3 jewels.
Directly.
So the abbot would have, I guess, committed that one. But then he passed the jewels to this official, and then the official, if the official even has this bodhisattva vow, maybe not, but if they do, then they would commit this one by accepting those stolen goods. It's kind of complicated. A bit complicated and hopefully not likely to happen around here. It could have happened in Tibet because I think the temples and the monasteries did have quite precious things.
I guess motivation was mentioned in some of the earlier ones, but not here at all. What about a situation where, the Abbey or someone else receives a guest who says, 20 years ago, I took this from, a temple in India or in Tibet, and I feel terribly guilty about it. Can I give this back to you as a way of giving it back to the triple gem? Like, would that be covered by this?
That's a good question. I guess if that was me, someone, tried to do that with me, I would recommend that they give it back to the place where they stole it. That would be the most appropriate thing. I wouldn't feel comfortable to accept that myself. Even the Abbey accepting such a thing. I can't imagine Venerable would agree to that, so try to give it back.
We had not quite similar, but there was something sent to us, and the origin of that was unclear. Was a very old mask, ritual mask, and so we contacted Tibetan, non-Tibetan from Tibet House or Tibet Office India, and first asked if they know about that mask, and then we sent that to the Tibetans actually. I think to Inyo, I can't remember where exactly, or we gave it to Tupen Jimpa and then he took care of it.
That's a good idea. Yeah, because apparently there's a lot of theft going on. There was this documentary some of us watched made by Al Jazeera about Mustang in Nepal and these people going in and breaking into these old stupas and temples and stealing these very ancient, precious statues and so forth, and then they get on the black market, and I guess some people are probably making millions of dollars from this. And I think they were suggesting some of them probably ended up in museums, famous museums, who may not always check where these statues are coming from. Anyway, yeah, so there is quite a market in stolen holy objects, and then I suppose it could happen if someone tried to offer one of these to the Abbey and it's difficult to know where it came from. But if there is a suspicion like that, then it could be offered back to a museum, Dharmasala or in Delhi, so that at least it can be, and they might know where it came from and then they could return it to the proper place. Okay, then number 17. Establishing unfair policies. This means to be biased against serious practitioners because of anger or hostility toward them, and to favor those with lesser attainments or none at all because of attachment to them. So an example of this downfall is to give most of our time as teachers to casual private students who can pay high fees and to neglect serious students who can pay us nothing. So, yeah, that's one way that this could be broken. Dr. Rinpoche gives more information. He says this one has two aspects. One is enacting harmful laws, taking the belongings of good meditators to give them to those who simply recite scriptures. So in the first case, the object is 1 to 3 fully ordained monks, bhikshus. I don't know why he doesn't mention bhikshunis, but I would think that is included as well, who are good practitioners. So people who are practicing well. And the motivation is the desire to harm them. The action consists of establishing a vile rule stating that the monks are not allowed to do meditation retreat for 2 years. For example, that's just an example, and that they have to take up an occupation that stimulates their afflictions like politics or business. It deprives the monks of the possibility of continuing their meditations on serenity and special insight, and obliges them to get involved in other activities. So when reading this, I was thinking of some cases of where this might happen, but not with the wish to harm. Perhaps if a person is doing a lot of meditation, maybe in retreat or doing a lot of serious meditation, but maybe they're going beyond their capacity and trying to do things they're not capable of doing, and so they're getting kind of imbalanced, mentally imbalanced, emotionally imbalanced. And the teacher wants to help them, and so asks them to come out of retreat and do some more practical work, offering service, just to get them grounded. Because it is possible when you're doing a lot of meditation to just get spaced out and lose touch with reality, and you can get quite sick. So it's a similar kind of action, but not with the motivation to harm, and instead it's with the motivation to help, to benefit that person. So this would only be a downfall if you have something against those practitioners and you want to disturb them and harm them or whatever. So you force them to come out of retreat, not meditate so much. So that's one way this downfall could happen. And the second way is depriving monks who are devoted to meditation of their possessions, food and other goods, and then give those goods to people who are just reciting scriptures. And again, the motivation is to harm the meditators. So, I guess that kind of thing happened. Maybe it still happens in some places. So if there are people who are practicing meditation and they're serious and sincere and they're doing well in their meditation, we should do whatever we can to support them, give them support and not deprive them of that or force them to come out of meditation and do less beneficial activities. Then, the last one, number 18, is giving up bodhicitta. So this is abandoning the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all. Of the two levels of bodhicitta, aspiring and engaging, this refers specifically to the first one, aspiring bodhicitta. But if we give that up, we also give up the second one. And Dr. Rinpoche says the person who would do this is somebody who has taken the Bodhisattva vow. And this can happen even if we just give up one person. It doesn't have to say, I'm not going to help all sentient beings. Even if you just single out one person, even an evil spirit or someone who's doing really awful things. And if you say, oh, that person is such a nuisance, I will never help them gain freedom from samsara. So even if you haven't given up your bodhicitta for other beings, but you have for that one, then you commit this downfall. And for this one, the 4 binding factors are not necessary. As soon as we think this from the bottom of our heart, I'm not going to help that person, push them out of our heart, we lose the bodhisattva vow. But he says, just thinking, I can't stand that person isn't a downfall. So you might have that kind of thought, oh, that person drives me crazy. Oh, I can't stand them. But if you don't go to the point of saying, I am not going to reach enlightenment for that person, I'm not going to help that person get out of samsara, that's when it becomes the downfall. So those are the 18 root downfalls. And then Alex has some nice information, advice about keeping the vows. He says, when people learn about vows such as these, they sometimes feel they're difficult to keep and are afraid to take them. We avoid this kind of intimidation, however, by knowing clearly what vows are. There are two ways to explain them. The first is that vows are an attitude we adopt toward life to restrain ourselves from certain modes of negative behavior. So maybe instead of vow, it's better to say precept. It's more like a training. I take this upon myself to train myself to, stop certain behavior that's harmful. The other way is that they are a subtle shape or form we give to our lives. In either case, maintaining vows involves mindfulness, alertness, and self-control. With mindfulness, we keep our vows in mind throughout each day. You have to remember that we've taken those vows. With alertness, we maintain watch on our behavior to check if it accords with the vows. If we discover we are transgressing or about to transgress them, we exercise self-control. In this way, we define and maintain an ethical shape to our lives. And then he gives a nice analogy. Keeping vows and maintaining mindfulness of them are not so alien or difficult to do. If we drive a car, we agree to follow certain rules in order to minimize accidents and maximize safety. These rules shape our driving. We avoid speeding and keep to our sides of the road, and outline the most practical and realistic way to reach a destination. After some experience, following the rules becomes so natural that being mindful of them is effortless and never a burden. Right? So most of us have the experience of driving, so it's kind of similar. We have to take certain classes and lessons to learn how to drive in the first place, and then we have to pass a test to get our driving license. And then we have to make sure we continue driving properly, otherwise we could lose our driving license, or even worse, get into an accident, lose our life, or destroy our car. So, knowing about the dangers usually impels us to drive carefully, avoid breaking the rules and so on, being mindful. And so it's true, after a while. In the beginning, it's a little awkward and maybe you're scared. I know I was scared when I first started driving, very nervous at the wheel. But, after a while, you get used to it, and pretty soon you can be calm and relaxed, and you just do it. You just know what you're supposed to do and not do. So he says the same thing happens when maintaining bodhisattva vows or other ethical vows. So I think that's helpful to understand that it's something we already have some experience of. And then there are these 4 binding factors for losing the vows. So I just mentioned them briefly before, but let's look at some more information about these. We lose our vows when we totally drop their shape from our lives or stop trying to maintain it. This is called a root downfall. When it occurs, the only way to regain this ethical shape is to reform our attitudes, undertake a purification procedure, such as meditation on love and compassion, and retake the vows. So if we commit a root downfall, then we lose the vow, but we can retake the vow. And it's good to first do some purification and regenerate our bodhicitta motivation, and then take the ceremony again. From among the 18 root bodhisattva downfalls, as soon as we develop the state of mind of the 9th or the 18th, 9th is when we hold wrong views, hold a distorted antagonistic attitude, like saying, oh, there's no such thing as karma, there's no such thing as enlightenment, there's no such thing as rebirth, it's just a lot of rubbish. So totally rejecting some important aspect of the teachings. So that's number 9. And then number 18 is if we give up bodhicitta, even for one person, one sentient being. So as soon as that state of mind arises, we lose the bodhisattva vow. This is, just because of this change of our mind, we lose the ethical shape to our lives fashioned by bodhisattva vows, and thus we stop all efforts to maintain it. Consequently, we immediately lose all our bodhisattva vows, not just the one we have specifically discarded. So it's because of that change of your mind. Your mind has gone so far away from your original intention to work for enlightenment for the benefit of all beings that you kind of destroyed that. So you have to start over. Transgressing the other 16 bodhisattva vows does not constitute a root downfall unless the attitude accompanying the act contains 4 binding factors. These factors must be held and maintained from the moment immediately after developing the motivation to break the vow up until the moment right after completing the act of transgression. You have to have these 4 binding factors in a continuous way. As soon as you start having the motivation all the way to the completion of the action. So the 4 binding factors are, first, not regarding the negative action as detrimental, not seeing there's anything wrong with it, seeing only advantages to it, and undertaking the action with no regrets. And number 2, having been in the habit of committing the transgression before, having no wish or intention to refrain now or in the future from repeating it. So it's probably something we've done before, so it's already something habitual. We've done it before, and we have the intention to keep doing it again. We have no intention to stop this action. Number 3, delighting in the negative action, undertaking it with joy. There's delight and joy. And number 4, having no moral self-dignity or what's called here integrity. That particular mental factor. Sometimes it's called a sense of shame, but yeah, that's has other connotations. Or self-respect is another translation. So self-dignity is a nice one. Or integrity. So being devoid of that mental factor, and the other one that's like a partner to it, consideration for others. He says here, care for how our actions reflect on others. So if our mind is devoid of those 2 mental factors, then that's the 4th of the binding factors. If all 4 of these do not accompany a transgression of any of the 16 vows, the bodhisattva shape to our lives is still there, as is the effort to maintain it, but they have become weak. So we weaken the vow, but haven't completely lost it. So he gives an example. Suppose we do not lend somebody one of our books because of attachment to it and miserliness. So this is related to vow number 2, not giving wealth, not giving the Dharma. So we have a really nice Dharma book, somebody wants to borrow it, and we say no. And we see nothing wrong with this. After all, this person might spill coffee on it or not give it back. We have never lent it before and have no intention to change this policy now or in the future. It's our policy to not loan this Dharma book. And I'm not going to change that. Moreover, when we refuse, we are happy in our decision. So we feel good about it. Lacking moral self-dignity, we are shameless about saying no. So there's no sense of integrity, like, maybe this isn't a good thing to do. We do not care how our refusal reflects on ourselves, despite the fact that as someone supposedly wishing to bring everyone to enlightenment, how could we not be willing to share any source of knowledge we have? Unabashed, we do not care about how our refusal reflects on our spiritual teachers or on Buddhism in general. And we have no intention of doing anything to counterbalance our selfish act. If we have all these attitudes when refusing to lend our book, we have definitely lost the Bodhisattva shape to our lives. So you've really blown it. We have totally fallen down in our Mahayana training and lost all our Bodhisattva vows. On the other hand, if we lack some of these attitudes and do not loan our book, we have merely slackened our efforts to maintain a Bodhisattva shape to our lives. We still have the vows, but in a weakened form. So even if we say, no, I'm not going to lend you my book, but we don't have such a, a full complement of all those four binding factors. So he says, for example, we do not lend our book to someone who asks, but we know it's basically wrong. So we, have a bad feeling about that. We do not intend to do this as a policy. So it's not like our policy we are committed to. I'm never going to lend my book to anybody. And we're unhappy about saying no. We don't feel happy about it. There's some unhappiness there. And we are concerned about how our refusal reflects on ourselves and on our teachers. Like, well, what's this person going to think about me and about Buddhism and about my teachers and about the Abbey? So we do have those kind of thoughts in our mind. We may have a valid reason to refuse lending it, such as a pressing need for the book ourselves. I need this book. I have to give a talk tomorrow and I have to use this book. Or we've already promised it to someone else. So we could have a valid reason for not loaning our book. Our motivation is not attachment to the book or miserliness. We apologize for not being able to lend it now and explain why, assuring the person we will lend it as soon as possible. To make up the loss, we offer to share our notes. In this way, we fully maintain the Bodhisattva form of our lives. So there's all these different facets, all these different aspects of what's going on in our mind. What is our attitude, our thoughts, and our feelings in this action of refusing to loan a book. So it gets complicated, but I guess again, after a while, it becomes natural. After training and practicing for a while, it becomes more natural. We progressively begin to weaken that form and loosen our hold on our vows as we come increasingly under the influence of attachment and miserliness. So that's with regard to this vow. So if we are working on our attachment and working on our miserliness, trying to reduce those, then that will help to maintain our vow, strengthen our vow. Please note that maintaining the vow to refrain from not sharing Dharma teachings or other sources of knowledge doesn't rid us of attachment or miserliness with our books. It merely keeps us from acting under their influence. We may lend our book or, because of an urgent need, not lend it now, but still be attached to it and basically a miser. So even if you have the vow and you're keeping the vow, you might loan your book, but you're still attached to it and still miserly about it. So just keeping these vows doesn't eliminate our afflictions like miserliness and attachment. But he says vows do help in the struggle to exterminate, that's a heavy word, exterminate these disturbing emotions and gain liberation from the problems and the suffering they bring. The stronger these troublemakers are, however, the more difficult it is to exercise self-control, not to let them dictate our behavior. So, yeah, he kind of goes on a bit more about this particular example. But anyway, the point is, in 16 of the root vows, those other than number 9 and number 18, for the downfall to be complete and to lose the vow completely, then those 4 need to be there. So I think, yeah, as you mentioned before, developing more mindfulness, cultivating our mindfulness, cultivating our introspection, developing awareness of our attitudes so that we can notice attachment, notice miserliness, notice selfishness, notice anger, and realize those are dangers. Those states of mind are dangerous ones because they can lead to breaking a bodhisattva vow, losing bodhisattva vow. But they're dangerous in other ways as well, because they can lead us to create negative karma, maybe break our patimoksha vows as well. As long as we're working on noticing and working on the afflictive emotions in our mind, then that should help us to keep our vows properly and not lose them. And then he goes and talks about 4 powers, how we can strengthen weakened vows. So if we have weakened our vow by maybe doing one of these actions not in a complete way, with all 4 binding factors present, but maybe with 1 or 2 or 3, he says the first step to repairing our bodhisattva vows, if we have weakened or lost them, is to admit that our transgression was a mistake. So we can do this with a purification practice. And talks about the 4 opponent powers. We need to be honest with ourselves and with our commitment. If we already felt it was wrong when we actually broke a specific vow, we re-acknowledge our mistake. We then generate the 4 factors, the 4 opponent powers. The first one is regret, feeling regret. But he says this is not the same as guilt. Regret is the wish that we, wish that we hadn't done the action that we did in the past, or the one that we're in the middle of doing right now. So feeling regret. It's the opposite of taking pleasure or later rejoicing in our action. We don't feel good about it. Guilt, on the other hand, is a strong feeling that our action is or was really bad, and that we are therefore a truly bad person. Oh, I'm bad, I'm horrible. Regarding these identities as inherent and eternal, we dwell morbidly on them and do not let them go. So that's guilt. So guilt is never appropriate or helpful. For example, if we eat some food that makes us sick, we regret our action. It was a mistake. The fact that we ate that food, however, doesn't make us inherently bad. So we don't feel guilty, I think, about eating some bad food. We just regret, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. We are responsible for our actions and their consequences, but not guilty for them in a condemning sense that deprives us of any feeling of self-worth or dignity. So this is what can happen with guilt. If it's really bad and it goes on, then we feel I'm useless, I'm hopeless, and that in turn can undermine the bodhisattva attitude, because we have to feel we are good, basically, and we have a lot of potential. We have the potential to totally transform ourselves and become Buddhas. We need a strong sense of self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence. And if we get stuck in guilt, it doesn't, it's like contradictory. I'm a lousy person, I'm a horrible person, I'm a bad person. How could we feel that we can reach enlightenment and help all living beings? So we need to differentiate in our mind. If it's guilt, or regret, and cultivate regret, but get rid of guilt. That's not helpful. And then the second power is promising to try our best not to repeat the mistake. Even if we had such an intention when transgressing the vow, we consciously reaffirm our resolve. So just really reaffirming that we want to keep these vows and continue on the path. And number 3, he says, going back to our basis. I guess that's the power of what's normally called reliance, the power of reliance. He calls it going back to the basis. This means to reaffirm the safe and positive direction in our lives and rededicate our hearts to achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all. In other words, revitalizing and fortifying our refuge and aspiring level of bodhicitta. So just renewing those attitudes in our mind. I think of it as putting ourselves back on the path. We kind of fell off the path. So now we put ourselves back. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to live my life. Renewing that. And then number 4, what we normally call a remedy, undertaking remedial measures to counterbalance our transgression. So these can include meditating on love and generosity, apologizing for our unkind behavior, engaging in other positive deeds. Okay, so concluding remarks, just a little bit here. We can see then that the Bodhisattva vows are in fact quite difficult to lose completely. Yeah, not that easy to totally lose them. So long as we sincerely respect and try to keep them as guidelines, we never actually lose them. This is because the 4 binding factors are never complete, even if our disturbing emotions cause us to break a vow. And even in the case of holding a distorted, antagonistic attitude or giving up bodhicitta, that's number 9 and number 18, if we admit our mistake, muster the opponent forces of regret and so on, and retake the vows, we can recover and resume our path. I think sometimes people just get so freaked out about the idea of, if I break a vow, I lose the vow and I'll go to hell. And, like there's no remedy. But that's rubbish. We can always pick ourselves back up, renew our original thoughts and feelings, intentions, retake the vows, do purification. So it's not like the end of the world. Therefore, when trying to decide whether or not to take the vows, it is more reasonable to base the decision on an assessment of our abilities to sustain continuing effort in trying to keep them as guidelines, rather than our abilities to keep them perfectly. So, we shouldn't think, if I take these vows, I have to be able to keep them perfectly, never make a mistake, never do any of these things, otherwise it'll be a total disaster. So again, see them as training rules and try, of course we have to have the sincere wish to try to keep them as best as we can, but even if we make boo-boos, make mistakes, it's not the end of the world. We can pick ourselves back up and keep going. It is best, however, never to weaken or lose our vows. That's the best thing. So we should try to do that. But even if we can't, it's not total disaster. Okay, so that's it for the root downfalls. Any questions?
Someone is asking, with number 14 of the root Bodhisattva vows, can you clarify the difference of this and encouraging someone following that vehicle to engage in the Mahayana vehicle?
I didn't get the last one.
So can you explain the difference between doing what's said in number 14 as opposed to encouraging someone to follow, someone who is following the lower 2 vehicles or the fundamental vehicles to engage in the Mahayana vehicle?
Well, I think we have to be careful about that. Buddha did teach these different vehicles for different types of people. And not everybody is suitable for the Mahayana. And it wouldn't be appropriate to push a person who is sincerely following that path, to try to push them to, come over here. I mean, I can't remember ever being in a situation like that. I had some conversations once with a monk, originally from France, but he'd spent like 25 years in Burma and Thailand, and was obviously very dedicated to following that path. And it didn't even enter my mind to try to encourage him to come over on our side. Because in fact, in our conversations, he said he found the Mahayana teachings quite strange and, very different from what he was accustomed to. And yeah, I just really respected what he was doing and, wished him well in his path. But yeah, it never occurred to me to try to, encourage him to come into the Mahayana. So, I mean, that's just my approach. Other people might have a different approach. But on the other hand, if someone shows an interest, asks about the Mahayana path, Bodhisattva path, then of course it's appropriate. You should talk about that. But still, not in a pushy way. I just feel that's really wrong in Buddhism, to try to push people. You can point out the benefits, give them Shantideva's book or His Holiness's book, give encouragement, but certainly not, in a pushy way. And definitely in your heart, have respect for whatever practices they are doing. I mean, that's my approach. Maybe somebody else would do it differently, but so I hope that answers the question. Yeah, because the vow is the way it's explained is really quite specific. You're saying that path will not get you anywhere, will not enable you to free your mind from afflictive emotion. So you're really kind of putting down that particular path. That's what's involved in that vow. It is. Definitely. If you follow, it was taught by the Buddha for certain people who are suited to that kind of path. And if they follow that path properly, they will be able to liberate themselves from all the afflictive emotions, from samsara. Definitely. I mean, if they're doing it wrong, that's another thing. I mean, maybe they're not practicing properly, making boo-boos or something. But yeah, they have also the tradition of practicing under the guidance of experienced teachers. So if they really do have good teachers and they're following their teachers' advice and instructions, definitely it's possible. Maybe not in this lifetime, but in other lifetimes, they can definitely attain nirvana.
I'm wondering, what is the main affliction or the main motivation for abandoning bodhicitta? It sounded
For
like
what? Bodhicitta?
For abandoning.
Number
it sounded
18?
like you said it's anger, but could it also be like thinking, "Oh, this is just too much"?
Yeah.
Like, how does it usually happen? How does?
I mean, what popped up into my mind was this one story. I don't remember who it was. Some famous person of the past who, it's kind of a strange story. This person was a practitioner of the Bodhisattva path and encountered somebody who asked for an eye, an actual eye. And so he pulled out one of his eyes and gave it to this person. I hope I got the story right. but he did it with his left hand, which in India you're not supposed to do, right? That's the hand you use for something else, so you don't give things with your left hand. And this person was so offended that he said, "No, I'm not going to take it." And so the person who tried to give the eye just thought, "Oh God, sentient beings are just hopeless. I don't think I can help them," and gave up. Have you heard that story before? Shariputra. In the same life as he was Shariputra, or in a previous life? Okay, yeah, I seem to recall it was Shariputra. Anyway, that's an example of a situation where somebody might abandon bodhicitta. If you encounter a really difficult person, I mean, you kind of understand in a way. If you think, I want to reach enlightenment to help all sentient beings, and you encounter somebody like that, then yeah, possible. So that's why we have to build up really, really strong love and compassion and determination to help others, no matter how difficult they may be, how horrible they may be. So, but isn't there a story about, was it Achan Mun? This Thai meditator who, I hadn't read the book. So, has someone here read the book? There's his biography. That he was previously on the Bodhisattva path and gave it up to follow the path to nirvana. But what was his reason? Did anyone read the book? What was his reason for giving it up?
I think he just thought his life was so conducive. He saw the opportunity and was like, it's too risky to get lost in samsara. This is the expedient path that I can get it done in this life.
Mm.
Also, I think his teacher may have left an imprint on him, whether or not he encouraged him directly. And his fellow companion was also keen on giving up his Pratyeka Buddha path for the Arhat path.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily happen due to anger or frustration with sentient beings. They're so difficult. So I guess there could be different circumstances. So we need to stop now. Thank you.